Hello and welcome back to Inside Update, a show brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org. We are a nonprofit newsroom where we investigate corruption in the state of Connecticut to get rid of it. We are here to pull back the curtain on wrongdoing across the state, and today we're here to talk about kind of a difficult topic. I'm joined by Mark Fitch, senior investigative reporter, and Alex Appel, our investigative reporter, who together worked on a investigation about a school downplaying teacher tickling concerns. It's called Control the Narrative. And Mark and Alex, as I said, worked together on this. So there are a lot of different angles, but let's just start with, I guess, the fact of the matter, right? Let's talk about what actually happened here before we get into some of the ways that this could have gone differently, probably some lessons for the future, and let's get into some of the systemic problems as well. Which one of you wants to go through some of the details here and just share exactly what unfolded that led to this story coming into existence?
Go ahead, Alex. You can take the reins.
Oh, okay. So just right off the bat, so while there have been allegations of a teacher tickling students, he's been charged with a few things. He has not been found guilty of anything. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you.
So at the beginning in the first half of this academic year, there's this private Jewish day school called Solomon Schechter, and one of their teachers was accused of tickling a student who had a few conditions, and her parents thought it was inappropriate. They thought a teacher should not be tickling a student. She's about 6 years old. They also thought, given this girl's medical conditions, she has a heart condition, tickling could even be dangerous. And she said that the tickling hurt her. And so around this time, the girl started having some behavioral changes. And so her parents brought their concerns to the school, and the school did not, they gave the teacher a warning, but he continued to tickle other students. And so what this story is really about is the school's response to these allegations of behavior that maybe on its own might be not inappropriate, but a pattern of behavior that really concerned a number of parents at these schools. Eventually, the teacher kept tickling students after being warned not to. Eventually, he was actually arrested and charged with a felony. And then they came out that he did this at a school he had worked at last year with a different student who had whose parents also raised concerns. And then the second component to the story is, at least Mark, let me know if I'm missing anything. When the complaint was first made to Solomon Schechter, the school did their own internal investigation, and then they filed an anonymous report to the Department of Children and Families, or DCF. And that didn't trigger any concerns. When the kid's mother pulled her out of school and put her in a public school district, and she told them why, their mandated reporters also told DCF, and whatever the differences in between those reports, when it came from the public school district, DCF took it a lot more seriously, and that's what led to these charges against him.
And it's part of the issue was that the parents, and there was more than one, and here's where you start getting into some of the problems that we were discussing in the story, is that the school really, in its public communications with the rest of the parents and its communications with the outside world, basically said, like, oh yeah, like one or two parents had a problem. It was really more like four parents had a problem. And so they just kept kind of downplaying what was going on. And so, they didn't, this, according to all the emails and conversations and everything that we have regarding this issue, they didn't want to go to DCF. They were like, we looked into it. Tickling is not something that can trigger a DCF, investigation, but the mother really pushed and she really wanted it done. And so when they did go to DCF, they did so anonymously, which, oddly enough, is the same thing that happened at St. Gabriel's involving the same teacher and same officials that, different officials, but the same thing where they don't really want to do this. So, it really goes to the matter of like, how did you report this to DCF? It was like, oh, if it's, oh, hey, a teacher tickled a kid, but the kid's fine. And, like the parent was just a little concerned. Do you think, if you present it that way, sure, it sounds like nothing. If you present it in a different way, which is the way that, the public school presented it, in that this teacher is singling this child out, tickling them repeatedly, even though they don't like it, and the child is having like withdrawal, like he's kind of withdrawing into themselves and is experiencing these behavioral changes. Well, that sounds a lot more serious. So it's how this was presented to DCF, as well as, how the school was handling it internally and with their parent population.
I definitely want to talk about the angle of reporting things to DCF because ultimately it is a human being who is responding to these, right? Receiving the intake. So that framing is interesting. But before we get there, I want to talk about the the framing of the comms from the school because this is multifaceted. And if you could talk a little bit about not just how this was communicated to parents and concerned members of this, I don't know if insular community is the right way to say it, but the smaller community of those who are directly involved to the school, and then also the communication to you two as reporters when you started asking questions. I mean, I gather that there's some similarities that are not all together all that pretty.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, just kind of watching this unfold, and like, Alex and I were working on this story, but the story is also still taking place out in
Yeah.
the real world. WTIC and Reese on the radio, really kind of hammered this story over a couple of weeks. And what was interesting was like the school would respond to those, to the radio. They would respond to, stuff that was like on Twitter, they would send the parents, things like, and I don't even think the parents probably even knew that these radio interviews took place, but they would blast the parents saying like this, these stories are coming out and they're not accurate and blah blah. And so then when we actually reach out and say, all right, here's some questions, we're working on this story, here's some questions that we have. I was shocked. I mean, I was shocked with the response that they gave us. I mean, they gave us an email that they had sent to parents that we already had. And I remember messaging Alex and saying, I can't believe they just sent this to us. Like, what are they thinking?
Yeah, it really seemed like they were in kind of a panic mode. There was one meeting and it was like a state of the school meeting. And the head of the school, Rabbi Jonathan Berger, even referenced this incident directly and straight up said, like, all of the parents, to my knowledge, are satisfied, even though not too long before that, there was one parent who said, okay, I want to withdraw my kid from this school after this play is done because I'm not satisfied with how you've been responding to this. It just seemed like there is a real frenzy to control things internally and then to just not even acknowledge it externally when given the chance.
Well, so there are mechanisms that are supposed to be working to deal with this, right? I think, of course, we want administrators and people who are directly dealing with these kids to be responsible adults and look out for their best interest. But when things go wrong, there is an agency in Connecticut that exists, right? The Department of Children and Families uh, is supposed to step in, do investigations, uh, basically hold people accountable, right? So again, really interesting here that depending on the report that they receive and the framing, despite the facts being the same, right? There's reality. The way that it is given to them is going to impact whether or not a case gets taken up or whether or not there are follow-up steps. So, as you said before, from the private school to private schools, no action was taken. But when it's framed a little bit differently from this public school, all of a sudden there is at least some activity. That isn't the whole story, though, about DCF, right? I mean, we could be an outlet that frankly just writes about DCF corruption and issues and inefficiency, right? I mean, we have stories from day one almost about the way that this has DCF has run into problems. In this case, though, I guess could you talk a little bit more about that communication, what the parents said about, you know, what they had hoped would happen versus what actually happened? And I know that we could probably also talk about this audit that came out yesterday about some of the problems at DCF more broadly. But start with the communications aspect here.
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things that came up is that, we got a hold of the DCF investigation report into this whole thing. And it lists in the top, and this, they forgot to black out some of it, so we were able to get some additional information that maybe, wasn't intended. But he said, it was into the looking into this particular teacher, and it was prior DCF history. And it was at least 3 paragraphs long, most of which were blacked out. So that tells me that there's a history here. It's a history that is not, like this isn't the first time that, his name has come up to DCF, right? And, in the realm of child protective services. Now, you want to go look me up at CPS? There's nothing, and I think then, and most people probably they don't have a history, but here's this guy, he's got 3 paragraphs worth of history, and you're getting another report about him. I just, like, does that show a pattern? And like, I totally understand, and this is in the report that like, you know, the tickling wasn't done in private. It didn't involve any, areas of the body that would be considered sexual in nature. They There was nothing in their statutory powers where they could sit there and say, yes, we need to substantiate. It was either it was like emotional neglect or physical abuse. They couldn't substantiate that. It just doesn't work. And the DCF investigator, did indicate they had a conversation with the teacher being like, you should not be doing this, like this is detrimental to your career. And I think it was on that same day he got arrested, um, the first time. So I think and one of the things that also came up is like, okay, the police saw reason to arrest him. Like they arrested him for I think it's disturbing the peace and endangering the welfare of a child or something along those lines. Um, and twice, like Windsor police did and West Hartford police did. But their standards between DCF and the police are different. So, the police are like, all right, you're going to hash this out in court. But clearly there's a problem here. DCF, on the other hand, was just like, under the definitions of what constitutes a neglect and abuse and everything, this does not meet it. But we've got a problematic history here. And,
Yeah.
as we said before, the fact that the guy, you know, this clearly affected his job at St. Gabriel's in Windsor. And then he comes to West Hartford and it becomes a problem again. And he keeps doing it. I mean, this is when I sat there and I do wrestle with these things, writing these stories. Like, is this guy just like, is he just getting thrown under the bus? Like maybe he's just a, perfectly great guy. And, it's like a witch hunt. But then I was like, why do you keep doing it? Like you can't keep doing it and sit there and, you know, it's tough, to sit there and be like, oh, he's perfectly, fine, nice guy, whatever. But why are you like endangering your career so much just to keep tickling these kids? You know, it's very, very odd to me.
Yeah, I know it was described that, the tickle when he was tickling, he was in dad mode, right? I mean, so there's like some angle here of, closeness and educators providing a support system. But I mean, when you're dealing with minors, and I think maybe this is something that we could talk about in terms of journalism too. When we get tips related to minors, we have a process that we work through, right? I mean, we're going to use pseudonyms, we're going to protect identities, we're going to do, like with CSCU, when we got documents about sexual misconduct that they had neglected to redact properly, we took the time to redact the students and minors' names. who we want to take those extra steps to do the protection. Um, I guess could you talk a little bit about how you work with that as a journalist too, to make sure that you're doing the right thing? And I mean, do you see yourself as taking an extra level of protection for that, or what other considerations do you have in your mind when you're writing about these sensitive issues involving kids?
I mean, I certainly see that. As an extra level of protection. I mean, one thing to consider is if identifying information gets out, this can follow these people for lives,
Yeah.
for their lives. And that's not something anyone wants. Something happened to them or might have happened to them when they were a kid, and that's how, you don't want that to follow someone. And so I know Mark, you did most of the interactions with the parents in this story, but you were talking to them and making sure that the information shared wouldn't give them away. And you and I have had some conversations too, just making sure, like going through the story, editing it multiple times, trying to make it clear, like, or trying to be sure that nothing identifiable can slip through the cracks.
Yeah, it's a pain in the butt to do though. I have to keep like a little rubric of names in my head, you know.
I
Um,
think we used the same pseudonym by accident for two people for the first draft of the story.
did we?
Just
Yeah.
really a double blind. Everyone's referred to as John. That's it.
Yes.
Just make sure that it's
Well,
protected.
you'll never crack our code.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't even know it. That's it. At least until we get into a second draft and we're fixing the yeah, I guess that's one of the risks of teamwork in journalism too, right? You have two separate rubrics you have to do cross-referencing in multiple drafts. Um, I appreciate both of you having that mentality. I know it's something that, we talk about, and with Brandon and Catherine too, right? They wrote the CSCU stuff and the Yukon stuff, which is still unfolding. And I think it's something that all journalists need to have in the back of their mind. But I mean, especially because we deal with corruption specifically, it needs to be that much more prioritized. We need to have it in our day to day and in our practice. And I think, we work really hard to have an open line of communication about, hey, how are we going to handle this? Does X story require, getting a lawyer involved to review it? How do we protect ourselves and protect the people who are out there? Again, we throw out the word allegedly as well, too, right? Like this individual, we also want to speak directly to the facts and not write some sensationalized story that is, hammering someone who has not been found guilty. It's an interesting line to walk. It really is. You guys did a really good job on both fronts, keeping that balance there. Mark, you looked like you had something to say.
Yeah, no, it is, and it is a delicate line to walk, and you do your best, and I really do try to be fair, and that's one thing, in our final edits that I messaged Alex about. I said, just go over this again, like make sure we're doing our best to be fair to the school as well, and the top school official there. Just obviously they gave us practically nothing to work with in their to defend them with. But even then, I feel it necessary to step in and be like, all right, let's just make sure we're showing that there wasn't necessarily malice here, but there was certainly the concern for like taking the parents' concerns was a step below where it should have been for the school officials. Like their top concern, like I think this is the overall like message you get from the story is that the school's biggest concern was to not look bad in the outside world, and that took precedence over the parents' concerns. And I think that's where we really get into a problem. I don't just see it here, I see it all over the place. Everybody is so concerned with how they look in this, age of social media that they're shooting themselves in the foot over and over again, um, failing to prioritize the things that really do matter. And in doing so, they end up it ends up being worse for them.
Can I
Yeah.
just add that it's not just the parents' concerns. Even if the teacher is completely innocent, clearly the student was in clear emotional distress being around him. Um, even if he did nothing wrong, it was clearly damaging to her. And they wanted her in a one-on-one meeting with him.
Yes,
Yes,
that
I
was.
forgot
I
about
mean,
that.
that was like that was one of those jaw-dropping moments for me, and I think like I know we were pre-planning this segment, we probably glossed over this, but the restorative justice meeting, like this was where it really put it beyond the pale to me when I was first just talking about this with the mother. She's like, she said, and then they wanted to do a restorative justice meeting between the teacher and my daughter. And I was like, what's a restorative justice meeting? And she's like, let me tell you. It's basically taking the two, putting them in a room and saying, oh, like trying to hash out what each did wrong so that they can be on like an equal playing field again.
This is a 6-year-old, just so we're all on the same
Six-year-old
page.
girl and a full-grown male teacher. Like that is the dumbest thing that I've ever heard in reporting on these matters. So, congratulations, Solomon Schechter. You took the cake there.
We don't have like annual awards for various things that we give out, but maybe we should look into some various categories because unfortunately we could come up with quite a few. And as we get down to probably the last 10 minutes or so of this episode, I also obviously, yes, if you are listening to this or watching this, go read about the restorative justice process and the communication back and forth there, right? I mean, those emails, the quotes in there, it's fascinating to see the way that it's explained and justified, and make your own judgment call on how you feel about that as a way to resolve issues between a 6-year-old and an adult teacher. But I also want to talk briefly about one of the reasons this is clearly, as we mentioned before with DCF, this is not the first time we've written about issues not being taken up, issues that have not been resolved to the public satisfaction, but also, we deal with communication issues with DCF pretty frequently as well. We request information, it doesn't come back, which makes it very difficult to nail these sorts of things down. There was an audit that came out yesterday. There were 18 findings from the auditors, the public auditors in Connecticut. And I guess, Alex or Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because my understanding is that some of the arguments that they made was that, hey, we don't have enough people and money to do the job we've been assigned. Is that a fair characterization of their response? And if you want to talk about some of the specific issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, that has been a fair characterization of their response for the last, I don't know, 15 years. Ask any department in the state if they have enough people and money. The answer is always no. So, like, as far as this particular audit, I mean, Alex, I think you had some more specifics on it, but yeah, they don't have enough people. They don't have enough money. I mean, welcome to government.
Yeah. I mean, and some of the stuff is genuinely shocking. Just like, sorry, just pulled it up to make sure I'm reading it correctly, but like right off the top, one of the first significant findings that was highlighted by the auditors was they didn't complete internal reviews for child abuse or neglect registries within 30 days of an appeal it received for 1/5 of cases. And that's a lot. That's a lot. Maybe this is a bit callous, but one of the things that I was taught in journalism school, one of the things my professor told me, now this was in the context of requesting records, but we were told often, um, there's not enough people, we're having issues meeting this request, doing this job. And one of my professors said is like, well, I'm so sorry to hear that that's your job, you know? And I mean, that's government. I don't know the challenges of working, but I know that they have a job and there's a significant number of instances where they're not doing, it's not even an issue with protocols, it's an issue of following through on them, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's a common claim, just in our transparency work too.
Yeah.
We had that. We're Connecticut is one of the only states that doesn't have a time limit on how long you can take to respond to a FOIA request. So when we have stuff that stretches out over years, I mean, heck, even the governor last week was asked about this and said that he would support some timelines being added because he recognizes that there are these massive problems going on. And, DCF has almost 2,300 employees and a budget of $128 million. So we're talking about a significant amount of people and resources being devoted here. So I definitely feel that. And, I think your professor hit the nail on the head, though. That is the job at the end of the day. And it's even more serious. It's not like you're just, hey, I want to request X, Y, and Z. These are some really serious things that are not being followed up on, not being transparent about. And downstream, if the impact is kids being hurt, I mean, that just seems kind of right on the nose here.
I mean, we're at the point where at least once a year, DCF is hauled up in front of one of the, legislative committees to explain themselves, in what I think it's 2023. It was after our story came out about the Star home.
Yes.
Just recently, it was it was the guy in Waterbury who was held captive in his own home for like 20 years, and DCF had multiple reports on him. And so yeah, it's almost a once a year occurrence. Like that they have to go up there and explain what is going wrong, but I don't know. Like I said, it's a messy part of state government. I do have some sympathy for what they do, and at the same time, when these mistakes come out, they're usually very obvious.
It seems like everyone could use a lesson in crisis communications and managing what they need to do here across the board. Um, any last words here before we wrap up this episode?
No, I think, people should take a look at the story because there are nuances in there when you start looking at, okay, if it was my kid, would I find this problematic, right? Should a teacher be tickling young students on a regular basis? Is that like okay? Is that dad mode or is that start getting weird? Um, and I think when you insist on doing it, it starts getting weird. But, like we said, at this point, they're all allegations. He has not been found guilty of anything. He's pleaded not guilty to the one set of charges that he's been able to enter a plea on so far. But once again, I think this is just an ongoing problem of organizations and institutions caring more about image than actual service and responding to the things that really matter in their organization.
Alex, any last words here?
I think Mark said it perfectly. Yeah, but please check out the story. Please read it.
That investigation is called Control the Narrative. Parents claim school downplayed teacher tickling concerns. And you can read the entire thing at insideinvestigator.org. While you're there, please check out all of our news and investigations. There's quite a backlog of stories written by Mark, Alex, Catherine, and Brandon. Some really excellent work. Thank you both for your time today and talking about this. To all of you watching, listening, and tuning in, thank you for your support of our nonprofit newsroom and our mission to root out corruption in the state of Connecticut. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.